everybody. Welcome back to Difficult Childhood. My name is Falon, and as always, I'm joined by my lifelong friend and amazing co-host, Jason. And this week, we're talking about the subject that I have dreaded ever since we started this project in October of last year. It's horrible to discuss, it's stressful, and it's a triggering subject for a lot of people. So if you know anything about CSA and the organization, that's what we're going to be discussing. So just a warning, if you're not in an emotional place to discuss that subject, jump ship now.
Right. And I feel like I want to be honest with everyone here that this is the second take because I wasn't communicating the information or the numbers effectively that I did the research on because it's so jarring. I just kept bouncing around. So I'm going to really try to pull myself out of my amygdala and really focused here. But yeah, I know we're both doing our research on this. I learned so much about how much worse it is than I thought. And this is not just keep watching clickbait type of thing. It is so much worse than I thought.
Yeah.
And I already thought it was a problem.
Yeah, you already know it's a problem, but the organization is very hush-hush with members about what kind of problem or how broad of a problem it is. And just to start off, of course, a lot of people say, well, why are you still discussing it? Well, number one, it's still a problem. But number two, if you can't admit that it is an issue, then the steps that need to be taken to address it or prevent it, correct it, or help the people that have already been victimized by it can't be taken if you can't even admit that it's a problem. So we're going to start there.
Right. And I think it must be said that we don't think that the governing body wants this to be a problem. We don't think that the governing body are child molesters. We don't think that they want to harbor or protect child molesters. But in their arrogance and in their procedures, they are effectively doing that. And quite accidentally, very Keystone Cops type of situation. It is completely... They're bumbling around with their solutions to this horrible problem. And then initially in the research, I asked, and I'm sorry, I'm always harping on this lately, AI. I asked, who are the top 6 religions that have CSA issues and have received, the most complaints about child sex abuse? And it bounced back a list. And it said, number 1, Catholic Church. I think just culturally, we know that's a problem.
Sure.
Number 2, Jehovah's Witnesses. That they came in number 2 surprised me.
Yeah.
Number 3 was the Southern Baptist Convention. I guess that's a specific type of Southern Baptist. 4 was Islam. Then 5 was ultra-Orthodox Jews. And then number 6, they just considered other non-denominational Christian religions. They just grouped it together. And I was interested that the Mormons didn't even make the list.
Yeah.
And they have 17 million members. And I think a lot of this has to do with that they, I'm talking about the main Mormon, church.
Sure.
A lot of this has to do that they don't have the 2-witness rule. What do you think?
Absolutely. The 2-witness rule is ridiculous. And if you don't know what that is, it's a policy that Jehovah's Witnesses have in place that any abuse or crime that takes place has to be corroborated by the initial witness and then a second witness. And if you are a child predator, you almost always work alone. So there's not going to be a second witness most of the time. So the fact that is needed to take any action within the congregation is just outlandish. But then also, I think the Mormon Church, from what I understand, a lot of the abuse that has gained more attention, if you've not seen the Netflix documentary, Keep Sweet, Pray Obey, it's incredible. But the Mormon Church has a lot of offshoots. And the Mormon Church goes out of its way to address that and say, we're not with them. They're not with us. We're not the same.
Yeah.
They really make a point to like draw that line in the sand and say, you know, these are like zealot organizations, you know, that maybe at one
Right.
point were loosely based on Mormon teaching, but the more fundamentalist type sects of the Mormon church, I feel like is probably where there are less safety protocols in place.
Even though really Joseph Smith was the one that was responsible for starting those as well. But yeah, that's a good point. But it was interesting that the main Mormon church isn't having that issue. But I thought about this a lot, and I thought, wait a minute, how many Catholics are there? I get they're in number one spot because they have priests who have access to children,
Sure.
altar boys particularly, and they and they do their whole they're celibate. Sorry, my word escaped me for a moment there.
Mm-hmm.
So that celibacy causes other issues as well. So that was like, okay. But then, so the Catholics have 1.39 billion members, and Jehovah's Witnesses have 8.8 million. And Jehovah's Witnesses with, so that's one JW per 158 Catholics.
Right.
And yet, the JWs are still holding the number 2 spot.
That's scary.
Ahead of Islam. Now, admittedly, I would imagine it's a little harder to sue there's not a central, church that you can sue as much, but just ahead of Islam, ahead of Southern Baptist Convention, ahead of all these other organizations. To me, per person, I don't think you can possibly reasonably state that Jehovah's Witnesses don't occupy the number 1 slot if you consider per publisher, per JW.
Right. The actual concentration within the organization. It's crazy that they're even that close. And I'm not saying Catholics get a lot of things right, but they do regularly, talk to the press, to the media, and they acknowledge, yes, it's a problem, it's an issue. We're continually having to reassess, what we're doing to control it, to prevent it. Screening processes, education, they at least have the boldness to just be honest with their members. Like, yep, it's a problem. And I feel like that's...
And they certainly didn't always have that policy. They had the move around policy where they just, slide priests to different parishes. But yeah, they're not doing great of it, but it's better than what the JWs are doing.
Right. I feel like that's another reason we are talking about this now, because older generations, like my parents, they still seem to be sort of stuck in this don't ask, don't tell mindset. Like, if we don't talk about it, it's not happening. And of course, that's preposterous.
Yeah, that's not how it works.
And I think too, for a lot of people, maybe you have heard of this subject before. Maybe you know what the Australian Royal Commission is, but maybe when you first heard that information, you were at a different place in your own life. And maybe now you're on the fence about some issues. Maybe you're looking for something to validate your feelings that, this is not God's true organization. Maybe I do need to get out. Maybe revisiting this topic or learning something that maybe you didn't know before could be an eye-opening experience for you to help you begin your exit process.
So in my research on this, I know both of us found a couple different articles here. One was from a Dr. Michael Sitto, and you can see our sources here in the description of the video. But Dr. Sitto is a clinical and forensic psychologist at the Royal Ottawa Healthcare Group. In 2008, he wrote a book in which he put the prevalence of pedophilia in the general population at 5%. And this would include men over 18 who are attracted to anyone under 16. So a pedophile in this context is defined as that. But when we slim it down a little bit more, obviously the assault or abuse of a teenager is horrific. But if you really narrow it down to just those pedophiles who are exclusively attracted to prepubescent children, according to Professor Philip Jenkins, the figure drops between 1 and 2% of the population, just the general population. The problem here is that organizations like here in the US, we have an organization called the Boy Scouts, where they teach young boys how to camp and rough it in nature and tie knots, and it's cool. Gives them a lot of competence, and it's great. But pedophiles will see these organizations and they'll see them as an opportunity, a safe
Right.
haven, because you have the credibility of the Boy Scouts. Well, certainly nothing's going to happen to my kid if I send him to the Boy Scouts.
Right.
The credibility of the Catholic Church, or at least the one they used to have decades ago. Oh, certainly the priest is to be trusted. And then, of course, now we see the credibility of an organization like Jehovah's Witnesses. They're such friendly, sweet people that knock on your door.
Mm-hmm.
Certainly, none of them are going to molest children. And so pedophiles see this, and that's an opportunity for them.
Absolutely. It's an organization that provides a lot of isolation within. They always claim that we don't isolate children from their parents, and that's why we don't have a Sunday school. A lot of people don't know that Jehovah's Witnesses don't have any kind of Sunday school program for their children. They always say it's so important for children to learn with their parents, or learn as a family. But even though there's not a Sunday school, there are lots of mentorship programs that will assign one publisher, a brother or a sister, to one child. And if you are a predator looking for those types of opportunities, it's very dangerous.
Yes, and I think we both have some stories about our experiences with that that we'll share in just a bit. That's a really good point, because they pretend. In fact, there's a press release where they literally say, and I'll post the link to this as well, congregations of Jehovah's Witnesses do not separate children from their parents for the purpose of instruction or other activities. Nonsense. They certainly do. And so we'll get into that. But I also did some research, and it turns out that about 65% of Jehovah's Witnesses are female. So that puts it about 35% men. The internet said this significant gender disparity is particularly notable compared to other Christian groups. It's not happening in other groups. Other groups are more closer to 50-50, but Jehovah's Witnesses are kind of a female-dominated group, even though they're, you get it. With 8.8 million members, that puts 3,080,000 as male JWs. So if you have 3,800,000 male Jehovah's Witnesses, those are Jehovah's Witnesses. It's not counting small children that have their parents are JWs as well. That's not counting those males. It's counting anyone who is either an active preacher of their so-called good news, goes out in service every month, or is baptized and is active. Yes. So this would really only start affecting like when it's right around 12 years old, you really start getting the pressure to be baptized. So this group of JW males, of that group, 4.9% comes to 150,900. So that's about, and that would include the groups that, maybe you're 18 years old and you don't mind dating a 15-year-old. That isn't legal, isn't right, is damaging, is not a good relationship, but that 18-year-old male isn't necessarily going to grow up to be attracted to children. Right. But if you go down to the real nitty-gritty group, the rough group, this is men who are attracted to prepubescent children. If you just take 1%, that comes out to 30,800 men in the organization. And again, they are exclusively attracted to children, prepubescent children. That is the worst group in my opinion, and I think probably a lot of other people's opinion. And then I will break down one more. We've got 118,000 congregations. That's about one of those people, pedophiles, for every 3.8 congregations. That ignores the fact that the number is between 1 and 2%. And we just count the lower 1%. And it also ignores the other measure that men who are pedophiles seek out organizations like Jehovah's Witnesses to become a member because they borrow the credibility, as we said. That's a safe haven for them. So you've got at the minimum, one pedophile per every 3.8 congregations. That also ignores that many congregations, in fact, the last one I went to had 3, Kingdom Halls had 3 congregations in it.
Right.
So it very easily gets up to 1 or 2 pedophiles per Kingdom Hall. And if that doesn't change your view of walking into a Kingdom Hall and looking at those faces of men, and primarily men are the offenders, I don't know what will.
It's such a weird subject, because the numbers that we're talking about, when we're applying them to like the status or the stats of congregations within the JW organization, we're using the most lenient end of the scale. We're saying even if it was on the low end, it could be this common. So imagine, if we weren't so lenient with our numbers and we even chose like the median number, it would just be, so much worse. It's really upsetting. I don't really know any other way it's gross. It's disgusting.
Absolutely vile.
Yeah.
And these are the worst of the worst predators. And like you said, if you go up to 2%, you're about one problem person for every 1.9 congregations. And I can definitely support that number in terms of like I moved into a congregation here in Oregon. This is in 2010. And it took me a couple months to get reappointed as a ministerial servant when I transferred. And a ministerial servant, if you don't know, he's basically a worker bee in the congregation. It's a little badge of honor that I'm almost an elder type of thing. So I got reappointed, and then after I got reappointed, the service overseer, elder, came up to me and said, "Okay, this guy over here," and indicated his name. He all I can tell you is, if you're making field service groups to go out and preach, you set the car groups together, don't put him in any car groups with children. And for that matter, maybe watch out with him with your young wife. So this guy is a predator he said he was disfellowshipped for it.
Mm-hmm.
He's not in prison. I don't know how long ago this was, if there was any time for him to serve. I didn't know any of those details. But he was also completely unassuming looking. You didn't look at him and go, "Ooh, that guy's creepy."
Sure. And it usually is
it was just a regular dude.
The more unassuming looking ones. Because if you are someone that's wanting to make children feel safe with you, you're going to make a point to not have like a very imposing presence. You want to be the friendly guy. But also my qualm with what the brother told you, he said, don't put him in a car group with children. Okay, yes, obviously. Why are you putting him in a car group, period? Why are you dispatching someone that is a known offender to go knock on the doors of the people in your community?
I didn't think about that part of it. I was being kind of myopic. That's amazing. You're right. That's insane. That's so negligent. Why are you saying about to knock on people's doors?
Children or no children, they don't need to be approaching people's property. I wouldn't want that person to come knock at my door. And I just feel like the child in the car group is secondary. They shouldn't be involved in door-to-door ministry, period.
Mm-hmm. Right. It is just incredibly negligent. It was amazing to me. And also I was really annoyed that I wasn't told this until after I was appointed as a ministerial servant.
Right.
Oh, then I get the warning. Okay.
Do you feel like it's because you didn't?
Yes.
Do you feel like it's possibly because you didn't have any children that they never told you?
In fairness, that might be the issue. Yeah, that might have been the reason that they didn't tell me. But I mean, in the just general in life, in the population of the United States, if you are a convicted sex offender, depending on the conviction and everything, but usually you're required, if you move, you're required to inform everyone in the neighborhood. And I don't know why there's a higher standard for people who are outside God's organization for warning people in general safety. It's insane. Now, we included this number. So our base numbers here basically put it down at about very likely one pedophile for every 1.9 congregations is a very, very reasonable estimate here.
Yeah.
And I because of my experience with hearing about these things, and I mean, even in other congregations, in my congregation in Minnesota where I'm from, they had problems. There was a small town congregation, but they didn't want to alert the police because it's a small town, and you have a problem. So it's a huge issue, and I thought it was maybe a pretty rare thing, maybe one every 20 or 30 congregations there was it's not remotely that number.
Right.
It's far, far worse.
I think one of the reasons
you might be wondering about sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think another reason that this particular organization is so appealing to people with that predisposition towards minors is because we've talked about like the shell game, how you just get moved from congregation to congregation, that you're not necessarily kicked out long term or like banned. They just kind of shuffle you. But also if you are joining the organization, it's relatively easy to like rise in the ranks. So to go from being like a brother and then earning privileges in the congregation and then becoming a ministerial servant and an elder and so on and so on. You're not undergoing any, in-depth background screening. You're not having any kind of like emotional or mental health evaluations. You don't have to prove your education. You don't have to have attended seminary school, like in other beliefs, other organizations. So it's relatively easy and fast. You're able to progress quickly if you follow the rules and buckle down, and if you have a charismatic personality that just propels you even farther and faster. So to get into those positions where you have access to children, where you're in a position of trust, it's not as difficult as it may be in other organizations, I think.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I remember you're kind of talking about when moving around. I moved from Tucson in like 2009 to South Dakota for a job. And so I was there in South Dakota. My wife and I moved there, and we moved into this congregation, and they said, okay, well, we got your letter of recommendation. That's what happens. If you're already a ministerial servant, you get a letter from the last congregation. Hey, this guy's a decent guy. He always does his job and this needs to be a little more punctual or whatever, your goods and bads. And so they sat down with me and they said, great, we got you a great recommendation letter from you. Just before we announce that you're a ministerial servant here in this new congregation for you, we just have one quick question for you. I'm like, okay. I was thinking it was, what's your phone number for your file? Or, they were missing some piece of data. And the question they had, they expressed that it was to protect the congregation. So they asked me, have you ever been accused of, or have you ever molested a child? So they asked me. Now, if I was that kind of person, what am I going to say?
Yeah.
I don't mind molesting a kid, so I'm not going to mind lying, I guess. That was their big defense to protect the congregation. We got a new guy coming in, we don't know him. Let's just ask him, and then if he says no, cool, welcome aboard. And they literally said, okay, great. They literally relaxed when I said no, and welcome aboard. And I don't know, I'd never heard of that before, but it was just so unbelievably wimpy and ridiculous.
Yeah, that's the safety
and
protocol.
Really clearly,
a yes or no question.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I guess they could in court then say, well, we did an investigation. We asked, we checked, and yeah, he was a molester. We didn't know. We asked.
I mean,
how
it's not
insane
even
that
like
is.
They're having you like sign any kind of legal document, that later they could say, well, he lied, or whatever. That's nuts.
And the opportunities that were presented And I looked back then now, like back when I was a Jehovah's Witness, obviously I've never had that sort of predilection, but I also didn't think it was a problem in the organization. I
Sure.
just had no idea. So they would do, well, I moved into, when we moved here to Oregon, they immediately said, okay, we've got this kid, his older sister is a JW, but neither of his parents are. So go study with him. And he was an 11-year-old kid, and maybe even 10, and they sent me over to his house, and his parents went, oh, okay, the Jehovah's Witness is here to study with our kid. And they said, okay, well, all the kids are playing, so go study in his room. And close the door, it's really loud out here. Literally, this was stuff that they said to me. These are people that had never met me before. So there's this strange credibility that is applied to Jehovah's Witnesses that they will not do anything horrific like this. So much opportunity. And then another small child, I think he was like 7 or 8 years old. His father had recently gone to prison, and his mother was a Jehovah's Witness.
Mm.
So, single mother basically.
Right.
And they said, okay, go over there and kind of mentor him, take him out in service. I would drive over to their house. I'm 26 years old. I pick up this little kid and go, all right, let's go out in service. I'd hold his hand walking across the street. We go out and preach, and I'd take him back home and give him back to his mother. So much opportunity. And yet Jehovah's Witnesses in this document we'll show you here literally say that they don't have any activities that separate or isolate children with adults that are in the congregation. That is probably just 2 examples of, I can think of several other kids.
Mm-hmm.
I just remember, for some reason, I became the go-to guy. If you got a 9-year-old who needs to be studied with, sign Jason up. And it was just so much opportunity. It was absolutely horrific now that I look back at it. And those people didn't know me.
Yeah, same thing. When I was a pioneer, a full-time minister, they put me in this Pioneers Assist Others program. Now I was assigned to like another young, I say a young girl, but I mean she was, like a high schooler. She was just a little bit younger than me. But there were others that were assigned to kids that showed an interest in maybe going into full-time ministry. You want to mentor that, foster that desire, because that's what fuels your numbers, keeps the organization, the propulsion. But then also I think back to the 90s. So this was in 1993. And I only remember that because I was baptized on January 1st of 1994. So 1993, I was getting a lot of pressure to get baptized. I was 11, and why aren't you baptized? Why aren't you baptized? So in the organization, when you want to be baptized, you can't just be baptized. You can't just say, I repent of my sins. Christ is my savior. I want to be baptized. It's a very drawn out formal process. You have to ask for permission, and you have to be interviewed to make sure that you are, in reality, they're making sure that you're adequately indoctrinated, but they'll tell you they want to make sure that you're emotionally ready for all the responsibility that comes with being baptized, blah, blah, blah. So
right. All those questions to make sure you got the doctrine down.
Yeah. Make sure you know what's what the interpretation of scripture according to them. So it's a process. That. It's like a three-part process. So you'll go through 3, at least at the time, I don't know about now, but you went through 3 different interviews with 3 different brothers, and each brother would handle a certain section of JW doctrine to make sure that you understood it all. So I was 11 years old. All the interviews were at least an hour. And you're going over material, you're reading the Bible, you pray together, you just chit chat. They're, wanting to make sure you're on board, basically. So all 3 of the interviews were conducted at the Kingdom Hall at a non-meeting time. So the Kingdom Hall was totally empty. I was dropped off there and then picked up an hour or so later. Of the 3 men that did my interviews, now they were all nothing bad happened. Let me just preface that. They were all wonderful brothers. But of the 3 men, only one elder insisted that his wife stay during the interviews. Now, she couldn't be in the room with us, but we were in like the library. So it had large windows. So she sat out in like the main auditorium or the sanctuary. And we had the blinds open. We had all the lights on. So she could like see us at all times. But the other 2 elders, it was just us. There was not one other soul in that building, pitch black, no parents, no spouse, no nobody.
Complete privacy with an 11-year-old girl.
Yes, for well over an hour. So for them to say,
wow, I had no idea.
we don't have Sunday school, so your kids are safe. Come on down. It's ridiculous. It's so misleading.
Yeah. It's not just in the going out and studying. It's not just going door to door like I was doing with kids. It's in the Kingdom Hall itself. There was privacy with a little girl. Yeah. That's insane. Yeah. It's ridiculous. I think I think that kind of maybe takes us into the next little part here. We were talking about the Shepherd the Flock book and also this press release. I remember when I was waking up, I started kind of learning a little bit about the child abuse issues that were happening. And so I asked my dad about it. And he had been an elder for over 40 years. And I said, this seems like they're not reporting these crimes. And he said, well, it's very rare for a child abuse case to come up. He says, I've been on lots of judicial committees. That's where 3 elders judge and decide if someone's guilty of whatever sin. He says, only one of them involved child abuse. And the elders called the police. I thought, good, okay. And I kind of reconsidered it. And then, but I went and read after that, the Shepherd the Flock book, and I realized that it never once requires that the elders, or says that the elders should report to police. It says you should check your local reporting laws so that you're in compliance. But the first thing it says in every single case is to call the legal department at Watchtower. Call them here. And so you do that. And the frustrating part here is that my dad followed that instruction. He called the legal desk, and the legal desk said, call the police. And here's why. They don't usually say that. And we know that for a fact. But here's why. And that is because this little girl who was being on almost a daily basis assaulted by her father. She was between 8 and 12 years of age when it was happening. This little girl, just absolute misery. What a horrible life for that poor little thing. But she had it was only her father who was a JW. And she had no mother and no other family around. This father had isolated her in this hellish little apartment. And then, because there was no one else to report, the legal department couldn't justify it and say, well, we gave the opportunity to the family to report. Right. Her only family was the abuser. So that is the only situation that I've ever heard of the legal department saying, notify the police, when it wasn't legally required. Reporting laws didn't require it legally. So that is absolutely despicable because they act like they encourage it. But every time, if you read this section on the, let me look at my screen here. I'm going to link this, but there, the Shepherd the Flock of God book, the 2022 version, and there's a section in here on child abuse, and all the legal considerations you can go through, comb through it with a fine-tooth comb. Just really check every detail. Not once is it said that morally we should always alert the authorities, because then they're going to have tools to investigate that we don't have. And they'll have tools to protect other children that even aren't in the congregation that we don't have. The arrogance of it, they never think that they don't have all the tools to handle it.
Yeah, I mean, believe it or not, whoever is listening, the elder body is not a crack forensic team, okay? They're not Olivia Benson on the case. They don't have the tools, the knowledge, the experience, the training to handle any of that. And all I say that because what you just said about protecting people outside the organization, that phrase really goes back to my own waking up story. And I do want to cover this in a separate video. But when I was first waking up, the Australian Royal Commission was a big part of that. But I can tell you the exact moment that I said, this is disgusting and I don't want to be a part of it ever again. The whole commission, the whole interview process, there's lots of things in there that I heard that I didn't agree with. But initially, you're maybe not emotionally in a place where you're ready to cut the cord and make that big jump. So I was watching the attorney, the prosecuting attorney, interview one of the elders on the stand. And the elder was basically saying, well, we have the capability to protect our members, even if we don't call the police. Like, we can handle the majority of things internally, and we have the means to protect children within the organization. And the attorney said, what about children outside of the organization? Meaning, if you don't contact the authorities and there's no investigation that can be done, what are you doing to protect the children that live next door to the offender, or that, go to the same swimming pool as the offender? What are you doing to offer protection to people that aren't necessarily JWs? And the elder looked him in the eye and said, it is not our responsibility to protect every child in Australia. Go watch the transcripts for yourself, watch the video, read the transcripts. Basically, if you're not a member, then that's a you problem. If your kid gets assaulted, sorry, too bad. It's not our job. It's not our job to protect every child. And it took my breath away. I thought, what a disgusting mindset. It's
cold indifference.
It's gruesome. It's absolutely just so repulsive in every way, that you could say those things and then have the nerve to say, this is the true organization. This is God's chosen people. We're not like any other group. This is the one. Just really upsetting.
Oh, just face-meltingly disgusting. Oh my God. So I would like to, even though we won't have time to go through every one of these details, and we were going to do other episodes on the Shepherd, the Flock of God book, the Secret Elders book. I do recommend that you have a look at the one that we have online here. Not we, it's you can find it here. I'll go ahead and link it, and read through the entire section on how they treat this. It is real horrific, and if you just open your mind to, okay, they're literally trying to avoid. They're trying to avoid reporting, if at all possible, because that's reproach on God's name, which is kind of silly. If you think God is the all-powerful, your Jehovah you're worshiping is the creator of the universe, he can handle himself. He doesn't need your little legal department trying to keep his name out of the mud. He's got it covered. If he can do it.
Yeah, that reasoning is so flimsy. His Majesty doesn't need the legal department to back it up, in my opinion. Now, is it disgusting for someone to say that, they're his follower and then be involved in these activities? Sure. But the reproach that they're afraid of is the organization, not God.
Right.
We talked before about how they use those things interchangeably, but their worry is that if it's common knowledge that it's a problem, that it's going to alienate people, to possibly make current members leave or prevent new members from joining. So that's the reproach that they're trying to circumvent, if we're just being honest.
Right. And I think it's even more apparent when reading this whole section that the organization not only insulates, they don't disclose what's happening to the outside world. They also don't disclose how big the problem is to other elders.
Yeah.
Because, and I maybe roll back to my story about my dad being on a judicial committee involving this. My dad is a good dude. I have no doubt in my mind, he would never hurt a child. Sexually molesting a child, that's beyond. I could never imagine him doing that. He's a good guy who loves children, but he took his one case that he was involved with, and he applied the information to that must be how it's always handled. And he didn't know that it isn't, that they don't report. He literally read this book and still saw it from his angle, and still thought that all child abuse was reported. It's just crazy how much indoctrination can make you read this from an angle. But once you're out of it, you're like, oh my God, I'm blown away that they're clearly trying to cover this up. They clearly don't want to. The most ones that go unreported, the better for the organization.
Well,
it's terrible English, but you got it.
That kind of assumption or that kind of miseducation has a ripple effect. And I know this because my dad and your dad are best friends and have been for 30 plus years, since the early 80s. When I told my dad I didn't want to be part of the organization anymore, he wanted me to give him one specific reason. And I couldn't give him just one. There was numerous. But at the time, the one that I was most emotional about was the Australian Royal Commission. And so I shared with him the quote that I just gave you earlier about not protecting children. And I told him, over a span of 50 years, there's been almost 1,100 cases and 0 were reported. 0, not one. I said, so you can't tell me.
And that's just in Australia, to be clear.
Yeah, this is in Australia. I said, you can't tell me that there's no cover-up involved. Mathematically, you can't tell me that 1,000 families of their own free will decided not to contact the authorities without pressure from the elder body. He didn't really have much to say on it at the time. He said, well, I find that hard to believe, but I don't know, yada, yada. Fast forward a few years, your dad and my dad had talked. It was when my mom passed away. And I saw my dad after the funeral, and he had just recently seen your dad. And we hadn't talked about the Australian Royal Commission in years. I had been out for years. And after the funeral, he just randomly says to me, oh, and about the reason you don't want to be part of the organization, about the child abuse cover up. And I said, yeah. He said, well, I talked to Rick, Jason's dad, and we talked about it, and that could just never happen. That could just never happen on the scale that you're describing, like a cover up. It couldn't happen.
Right.
Why? Why couldn't it happen? Mathematically, it happens.
It did happen.
And that's what I said. They're just part of this old school culture. Like, don't ask, don't tell. If we don't acknowledge it, it's not happening. It's not a problem. Keep it secret. Keep it under wraps. And that's just so dangerous. So I would just encourage anybody that's watching the video, if you want to read through the links that we're going to share to the Shepherd the Flock of God book, or press releases, or any information that we share, take your time and really consider what you're reading. But also ask yourself, if this was my child, if this had happened to my child, and these were the fail safes that were in place to protect them, is it good enough? Mm-hmm. Can I lay my head down on the pillow at night and sleep in good conscience, knowing that this is the type of reporting, this is the type of behind the scenes methods that are used to handle this problem? And just see what answer you get.
Yeah, that's a really great way to look at it. I remember talking to my dad about, or talking to my mom rather, about that exact issue after I'd read the Shepherd the Flock book. And she, first of all, as said before, she thought it was an apostate version that I got online that was
Sure.
altered. It's not. I also borrowed the original from a friend of mine at the time, and I had to give it back to him. It was that one who left the organization when his wife got pregnant, and he it, she was offended. She said, "Can you really think so little of your father that you think he would be part of a cover-up of child molesters?" And no, I don't think so little of my father. I have a great respect for him in many ways, and definite, enormous confidence that he would never do such a horrific thing or try to cover it up. But he doesn't know what it is.
Right.
And she couldn't get that distinction. He doesn't know how bad it is. And not so your dad's talking to my dad, and my dad's reassuring him. Well, my father's data is deeply flawed. Like I said, he had a control group of one case he dealt with, and the legal department said, yes, do report.
Yeah.
So no, I don't think the governing body wants this. No, I don't think the vast majority of elders want this to be happening. But it is this level of problem. And the most elders, the way they've written this section, they have insulated the elders from even each other. Nuts. Well, there's this press release I wanted to share. I'm going to give the link to it. It's called Jehovah's Witnesses' Scripturally Based Position on Child Protection. And it goes on to list, first of all, pretty graphic descriptions defining what child sexual abuse is. It's horrific. But then talks about what elders do. And read this over, because there's such legal, this was written by a JW lawyer. There is so much dancing around the issue. It says Jehovah's Witnesses abhor child abuse and view it as a crime. View it as a crime, because they've been accused of that, not treating it like a crime, treating it like a sin. But then they go on to mention their process for dealing with child abuse, and it doesn't require them to report. So they're not treating it as a crime, they view it as a crime. Just these little word games they're playing
Right.
in this document. I'll let you guys read it yourselves, but gosh, it is an absolute monstrosity. I know when I sent you that, you texted back, I just got a knot in my stomach after reading the name of that document.
Yeah. I just read
But
the
it's on
title.
the Watchtower website. Yeah, it's on the Watchtower website, and it is under their public, their internal PR service that they use, their public relations desk that sends out news to the world. So that's what that is. It's very easy to identify how horrific it is. And one other thing I thought was very interesting was the victim supporting, their survivor supporting lacking that was going on. There's a section underneath this, the child abuse, about victims and survivors of child abuse. And it goes on to mention, you guys can find it yourselves, but it goes on to mention how the elders have limited time to deal with things in the congregation. They have to take care of so many responsibilities. So to help a survivor of sexual abuse may take, and I'm quoting, several visits by the elders, wherein they will listen patiently and share scriptures and reassure them that Jehovah loves them. And I don't know about you, but I think that CSA survivors don't need several visits. They probably need a couple decades of professional mental health care. It's just the great. We always say this. They're window washers. the elders are contractors and small business owners, and they have families. They do not know how to help somebody with that kind of psychological trauma. There's another section that's unrelated, talking about about suicide, and it just says, well, if someone threatens suicide when you're in a judicial meeting with them, maybe just try to calm them down and then revisit it in a couple days. So send them home after they just threaten suicide. Don't call any mental health professionals. The arrogance and the recklessness is insane.
Yeah.
Sorry if I'm yelling. I just
It's
I'm gonna have to
hard.
adjust the audio on this. I'm so upset.
It's hard to talk about all these subjects without getting really emotional, sad and disgusted and angry. It's just like a storm of just terrible feelings inside when you're discussing it. Yeah.
It really is. And I think, I guess the only thing that I hope this episode does, if there's anybody that is teetering, I know it is hard to leave. I don't know how hard it is to leave with children. I didn't have children. I left. I did not have children. I'll give you that. But which is better, to risk your marriage breaking apart because maybe your spouse is deeply in, risk your marriage breaking apart, but you left and you got your children, at least for the time that you have them, out of that kingdom hall.
Right.
I mean, which was worse? I mean, staying in for the peace of the family, but then, I mean, I wouldn't continue sending my little boy to Boy Scouts and think, well, he is. If we leave, he won't learn how to tie those knots.
Right. Yeah. At the end of the
At
day,
least
you
when
have
in
to
Boy Scouts, they're
answer.
learning something practical.
Yeah, you have to answer at the end of the day. If safety protocols aren't in place within the organization, you are the safety protocol. Mom and dad are the safety protocol. You are the fail-safe when nothing else is available. So if it costs, I mean, personally, if it cost me everything, and it cost me my parents when I left, and 99.9% of every friend that I ever had, would I leave again? Yes, I would.
Yeah. I've never had someone who left say, gosh, I wish I just stayed a little longer. And then now with this, just the amount of, I don't know how I'm going to, I think I broke like 3 pencils researching this. I don't know how anybody can stay in if you have kids, particularly. I can get it if you just a couple and you're trying to keep the peace in your marriage. Okay, maybe I can get it. But if you have children, you're going into just look at that audience. Next time, if you go on the platform, look at that audience, and probably one of them is exclusively attracted to prepubescent children. And then look
Mathematically,
over at
yeah.
your kid.
So I think,
I hope this helps.
yeah, I think that's enough. I think it speaks for itself. And yeah, definitely, we hope this helps. Is eye-opening.
I've never hit the end of an episode and thought, I can't do anymore. I think that's the reason I got to end this, because I just can't. My levels of can were here, and now they're way down here.
Well, next time we'll be on a less upsetting topic, hopefully. So we hope you'll come back and join us. But as always, we appreciate your
I know
feedback.
our next topic.
Go ahead.
If you want to do a teaser.
Yeah, go ahead.
Our next topic is so upsetting, but actually far less upsetting than this. We did that survey on our YouTube channel, and we were asking what were people wanting us to talk about, and how many pedophiles are likely in the organization, and we're going to break down the numbers. That's what we did today, obviously, and we went beyond that too. But then next time is how many people have been murdered or kidnapped or assaulted as a result of going out in the preaching work, door to door. Intrinsically, going to someone's door, there's always a little bit of risk.
Sure.
Knocking on their door, they could be a psycho with a gun. They could be, and you don't ever hear, you hear all the stories of all the, pioneers did this and that. You never hear, pioneer sister was abducted. It happens, and I've already done the research for that episode. It happens a lot. It's more that the governing body is not being transparent about the additional risk you are carrying by going door to door.
Imagine that. They're not transparent. It's mind-blowing.